Now, I want to give my perspective on language and try to share with you some of the things that I think are really important for communication students to think about. Now, language, so often in school we study language from a literary perspective. We talk about the best way to say something, the most correct or precise way to say something. And these can be important in communication. But before we can get to that, I think we have to talk more about that language is powerful, that it's not just random and unimportant, but it has a power to it. All right, so this begins, language is powerful. Now, the Whorfian hypothesis. This is used in many various disciplines, communication being one of them. And we take a fairly conservative approach to the Whorfian hypothesis. Some of you may know there's some controversy about it, but essentially Benjamin Whorf did research among a number of different groups of people, and one group that he studied was the Hopi Indians, and as he was living with them, he discovered that the language they used did not contain any past or future tenses. Everything was said in the present tense. Now, can you imagine what your life would be like if you only spoke in the present tense? And I think this example, more than any other one from Benjamin Whorf's work, shows us that sometimes just having words or not having words can frame how we see different things. So, I want you to think about this. Is it possible that the words we use can frame how we see the world, what our worldview is, and how we act in the world? And I would argue to you that yes, it can do all of those things. Whorf was also known for spending some time researching with the Inuit Indians, also known as the Eskimo. And what he discovered is that they had so many different words for snow. And because they had to deal with snow on a daily basis and it affected their life and livelihood and it factored into so many of their plans that they had to have a lot of different words for snow. Whereas in Tennessee, I find that we have many fewer words for snow. Can you think of some? Yeah, we have snow, we have sleet, ice, flurries, dusting of snow, sprinkling of snow, but we don't have all that many words. But we don't really need all that many words, do we? Maybe not. All right, so Whorf had these basic ideas, and in communication, what we take from this is simply that communication does make a difference in our life, that there is some power to it. And let me give you a set of words, and tell me if you can figure out what it is that I'm talking about. All right, the first set of words, champagne. Second word, sugar, velvet, good crud, windblown pack, man-made, cold smoke, groomed, machine-tilled, virgin powder. Can't remember all those words? Well, here they are for you. These are all different words that can apply to one certain object. Do you know what it is? Most of the time in school I have people guess drugs or cocaine more than anything else. But no, those aren't, as far as I know, those aren't words for that. It's all words for snow. I had 3 kids when I lived in Western New York, Buffalo, New York area. And you know what? We had our kids on skis as soon as they were toddling. And we used all of those former words for snow in order to decide whether or not we wanted to go into the slopes that day or if we wanted to keep our feet up by the fireplace. It affected our life. Benjamin Whorf would understand and be proud of this. Now, I just finished telling you about how language is important and that worse ideas that we used language that we needed, and if we didn't need it, then we wouldn't have it, we wouldn't develop it. And there's also this idea that language might be able to tell people, to kind of force people to think in a certain way. In order to test this out, a Trial Lawyers Association did a test, and they ran a court case, and it ran exactly the same way in front of two juries. However, in front of one jury, they used very bland language about the car accident the court case was about. In the beginning, the first jury heard a case with very neutral words. There was an impact, the two cars intersected, there was damage, and things like this. And it was very plain, dry, and the language chosen was not descriptive or colorful. Second jury, they presented the same case, except that they used much more evocative language. They talked about a car crash, they talked about they talked about the shattering, colliding, the cars spinning, and so you were able to get quite a bit of different word choice use. Now, they called both juries back a week later, and they asked them what they remembered from the case, and they each filled out questionnaires, and included in that questionnaire was how fast did they remember the cars to be going, and they asked about particular damage to the cars, such as were the windows broken, was there blood in the photographs of the car crash. And they found that the jury that heard the very bland subject, they thought the cars were going slower. They did not recall seeing glass broken or blood at the scene. But the other jury, who had had the same facts, just more descriptive words, they estimated the cars to be going faster. They expected there to have been some shattered windows, and they also thought that there was blood that was seen in the photograph of the accident. So, same story, same facts, but because of these different connotative word choices, the juries essentially heard two different stories. So language is powerful enough to create the sense of what's true and what's not true, even when there's not a difference in facts. The two juries interpreted it so differently because of the language that essentially they heard two different cases. All right, so that's this idea of how powerful language is, and I think this is so important for us in communication to really think about. Now, I want to give you another case. Jesse Jackson, 1988 Democratic National Convention. He gave a speech called Grandmother's Quilt, and I thought this speech was incredible. I was a young college student at the time, and I was a young college student at the time, and I wanted to get involved in politics, and I wanted to find out what my place in the world was going to be in terms of politics. And as I listened to this speech, it actually changed my political party because of this speech. America's not a blanket woven from one thread, one color, one cloth. When I was a child growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, and grandmother could not afford a blanket, she didn't complain and we did not freeze. Instead, she took pieces of old cloth, patches, wool, silk, gabardine, croaker sack on the patches, barely good enough to wipe your shoes off with. But they didn't stay that way very long. With sturdy hands and a strong cord, she sewed them together into a quilt, a thing of beauty and power and culture. Now, Democrats, we must build such a quilt. Farmers, you seek fair prices, and you are right. But you cannot stand alone. Your patch is not big enough. Workers, you fight for fair wages. You are right, but your patch labor is not big enough. Women, you seek comparable pay, worth, and pay equity. You are right. But your patch is not big enough. Women, mothers who seek Head Start and daycare and prenatal care on the front side of life rather than jail care or welfare on the back side of life. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. But don't despair. Be as wise as my grandmama. Pool the patches and the pieces together, bound by a common thread. When we form a great quilt of unity and common ground, we'll have the power to bring about health care and housing and jobs and education and hope to our nation. All right, do you see what the language did that was so appealing to a young, well, just a freshly graduated from college young girl? I wanted to be like that quilt. I mean, I wanted to work with other people. I understood that not everyone thought the same as me, but this idea that we could all come together and what we could achieve was so much greater than what I could ever do alone. You know, alone I was not worth all that much, but you put me with hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people, and I became a work of art. And so there was something so appealing about that. And it's interesting because I think God does the same thing, which is why we're all part of the body of Christ, because we all have these different functions and we come together and we work together well. This quilt is the same idea as that. You know, by ourselves, we just aren't powerful enough, but pair us with God and with the Christian body, and oh wow, what we can do for the Lord is amazing. So language has this power to change how you perceive things. And although up to the time when I heard that speech, I had been Republican, and I had grown up in a very conservative Republican home. So for me to change into Democrat was a pretty big deal. Now, the rest of my family is still Republican. I'm still Democrat, and yes, you can be a Christian and be Democrat. We'll talk about that some other time. But I found that language so welcoming. Now, I recognize that just because the language was there in 1988 in Jesse Jackson's speech doesn't make it true or real. And that's probably one of the hard things that I've had to overcome as an adult, is that idealism, because that's how I would like us to be, a quilt. But I don't think that it will happen, or that it did happen, or that it does happen, or will ever happen, unfortunately. But it's still something to strive for. All right, so just a little bit of my perception on language and that power of language. Your book talks a little bit more about some of the different types of language, concrete, abstract, metaphors. Now pay attention to all that. It's important as well. But I wanted to give kind of this academic perspective on language in communication. All right, that's the end of the language lecture series. Have a great week, and I look forward to reading your posts. Bye-bye.